Bye.
Bye. All right, we're moving. We are moving. Okay, we're bringing in April now.
I'm here.
Okay, you're here. Thank you. We are slightly behind, so I'm going to let you go, but I did just want to tell everybody the little tidbit you told me, which is how I just love this. This is unbelievable. The world's a small place. That April and Rasmus Leerdorf once were in a class together in college, which is just wild to me. Like, and now you're talking at a PHP conference, and here we are.
And
However
I'm
many years
not
later.
a PHP developer. That's probably even weirder, but okay.
All right, I'm going to let you take it away. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Hey, let me share my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
Can you see it? Hang on.
Yep.
Let me just rearrange everything and make sure it works. Okay, it works. Okay, so this is really shifting gears. And I hope you folks find this interesting, but this is really different from everything else I've seen at this conference so far today. This session is about positioning. And this is, in my opinion, if you're going to understand one marketing concept, I think maybe this is the marketing concept that you should understand. In my experience, it often makes the difference between a product that ends up being successful and one that doesn't. And the concepts of positioning, I think, can be applied to products, to companies, to your own career, to open source projects, to a lot of different things. And so I hope you guys find this useful. When I talk about positioning, it's a really misunderstood concept. I mean, even amongst marketers, if I were to get a group of marketers together in a room and say, define what positioning is, we would probably get a handful of different definitions. A lot of people think of positioning as the same thing as messaging or a tagline, or I had one person argue strenuously with me that positioning is kind of like everything we do in marketing, and I don't actually think that's true at all. We do a lot of things in marketing that aren't positioning, but a lot of the things that we do in marketing flow from positioning. In fact, everything on this slide kind of comes from positioning, but positioning has to come first. My definition of it technically goes like this. Positioning defines how our product is the best in the world at providing something that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, and it's trying to do a lot, this definition. And when I talk to folks that don't have a marketing background, I tend to resort to a handful of different analogies, but this is the one that I like the best. Positioning is a bit like context setting for products. And I use the example of an opening scene of a movie. So play along with me on this for a second. So I don't know if you've ever noticed this, the opening scene of every movie, in particular American movies, they often start with this wide shot of the city. So, you know, you walk in off the street, you sit down, you're in the movie theater, you're like, I don't know anything about this movie. I don't know anything. I don't know what time frame it is. I don't know where I am. I don't know what's going on. You sit down, you get this opening shot, and it's like, oh, there's the Golden Gate Bridge. I know where I am. I'm in San Francisco. Oh, you know, it's the Empire State Building. I know where I am. I'm in New York. And then it'll narrow down in on a neighborhood, and you'll look at the cars and you'll get an idea, does this take place in the future or the past or the present? This is a still from the opening scene of Apocalypse Now. The opening scene of Apocalypse Now is a great example of this. The movie starts with some kind of calm, tinkling music. There's a shot of the beach. If you've walked in off the street, you might think, hey, maybe this isn't apocalypse right now. This looks okay. And then all of a sudden the music gets a little more intense, and we see some dust, and then we realize, no, actually that's smoke. And then we see a helicopter go by, and then all of a sudden, boom, the beach is on fire. And we're like, oh no, this is apocalypse right now. Here we are in the middle of the Vietnam War. And then gradually the scene changes to Martin Sheen, and it does this little shot around his hotel room, and he's drinking and he's smoking, and he's clearly in distress. and he walks over to the window and he looks out the blinds, and we get the first line of dialogue of the movie, which is actually his thoughts. And he looks out and he says, "Saigon, I'm still only in Saigon. Every time I think I'm going to wake up back in the jungle." So here we are. We're 2 minutes, 3 minutes into the movie, and we know an awful lot about what's going on here. Like, we know exactly where we are. We're in the middle of the Vietnam War. We know exactly where in Saigon. We know our lead character has PTSD. He's been there before. We know what the tone of this movie is about. This isn't going to be a laugh riot. This is all going to be pretty intense. We can now settle in and pay attention to the rest of the details of the story because we've got our basic questions answered. Positioning works a little bit like this for products. And the reason it matters is because our products are in markets that are intensely crowded. We often don't think about it this way, but trust me, buyers think about it this way, customers think about it this way, and positioning helps customers figure out what it is they should pay attention to. So I sometimes show this picture as an example of just how terrifyingly crowded markets can be. If you could imagine all of the software to solve all of the problems in the world, this is one man's attempt to model just the software to solve marketing problems. And look at this thing, it's terrifying. There's 7,000 companies on this slide. Now, if I was a potential buyer of one of these solutions, how on earth would I ever figure out what products here I should pay attention to? Well, you can see that the person that built this slide has attempted to do that by separating things out into market categories. And in this case, there's kind of macro categories and micro categories. So the macro things are the colors, like the red stuff is advertising and promotion, and the orange stuff is content and experience. And then you can see inside there's particular little boxes, which are like micro categories that you can use to help figure out what to pay attention to. So say, for example, I'm a chief marketing officer and I want to put live chat on my website. So I look at this chart and go, oh man, I don't know what to pay attention to here, but maybe chat, it sort of feels like social and relationships kind of, oh yep, sure enough, there's a box in there that says bots and live chat. That's good. Now I don't have to try and figure out all 7,000 of these things. I only have to figure out, well, to tell you the truth, it's still pretty terrible. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on there, but at least it's not 7,000. But this is not all positioning your product in a particular market category does. It doesn't just narrow down the competition. What it does is it actually sets off a really powerful set of assumptions in the minds of customers about what your product is really all about. It looks a bit like this. So let's say I were to tell you something about my product, but all I could tell you is the market category, and that was it. And so let's say I said, hey, I've got this thing, it's really cool. It's this brand new revolutionary market leading CRM. It's customer relationship management. And that's it, that's all you get. It's a CRM, that's it. Who's my competition? You would assume that's Salesforce. They're the leader, undisputed in that market. So you would say, okay, well, how are you different than Salesforce? I would assume you compete with them. I would assume feature-wise, I would assume you do a bunch of basic CRM stuff, tracking accounts, tracking deals, tracking contacts through a pipeline. I would assume your target customer is the vice president of sales or the head of sales. That's who you sell a CRM to. Even things like price. Now, how would you know what I charge for my product? I didn't tell you anything about it. I didn't tell you a single thing except it was a CRM. But I know that you compete with Salesforce. And if I have an idea of what Salesforce charges, well, you must charge less because they're the leader in that market and you can't possibly be charging what they're charging. So here's how this works. If I do a good job and I position my product in a market category, and the assumptions that it triggers about my product are true, great. I just saved my marketing and sales team a whole lot of effort. I don't have to tell you who my competitor is. It's assumed. I don't have to list every single feature my product has. Half of that stuff is table stakes. Now, unfortunately, it works the same if I do a bad job of this. So if I position my product in a market category and it triggers a set of assumptions about my product that are not true, then marketing and sales are going to have to spend a significant effort trying to undo the damage that your positioning has already done. Let me give you an example to make this real. And so I get this call from these folks. They're in the Valley, and I get introduced to them by their investor. And the investor says, you know what? I love these folks, and customers love them. Customers that have bought their product just love this thing. But the problem is, a new prospect, when they start talking to somebody, nobody can figure out what the heck it is. So maybe that's a positioning problem. Can you help? I say, yeah. We get together on the phone and I'm like, okay, what's your story? And they said, so we got this thing. We're lawyers, ex-lawyers. And what we've built is email for lawyers. And my first thought was, who thought that the lawyers needed their own email? But okay, I'm not a lawyer, fine. And so then they jump into the demo and they're showing me the demo of this thing. And I get a few, and it looks cool. It's got this thing, it sort of looks like an inbox, and there's some conversations going on in there. And I'm like, hey, in your email for lawyers thing, how does the calendar work on this thing? And the founder says, oh, we don't have a calendar. And I'm like, wait, how does that work? Like, how do I replace Outlook or Gmail if you don't have a calendar? And the guy says, oh, we don't compete with them, actually. We don't replace them at all. And I'm like, but wait, so you're telling me the lawyers need two emails. They're going to have Outlook and they're going to have your thing. Then I'm like, well, back it up. So I know the customers love your stuff. And it is, so why do they love you so much? And they're like, well, we actually have this thing, and we got this cool tech. We got a patent on it. And what it is it's this super secure, context-aware file sharing. So what it does is the lawyers have their clients and they're going to collaborate on documents. And what this thing does is it looks at the documents and it looks at the relationships and the history of the communications, and it figures out who should have access to these documents, puts it in a super secure place, and it only gives access to the people that are supposed to have access to it. And I'm like, that actually sounds really cool. I bet the lawyers love that. No wonder they love your stuff. But it's also not email. If I wanted to solve that problem, would I go out looking for email to solve it? I don't think so. So what these guys have is a super cool, innovative, neat product masquerading as kind of crappy email. Now, what I could do is I could pick that product up and I could simply change the context around it. Not touch the product at all. What if I called it team collaboration for lawyers instead of email? So if I said, hey, what I've got here is team collaboration for lawyers, well, now all of a sudden I'm not trying to replace Gmail anymore, am I? I'm just kind of Slack-ish, actually. And I would expect that if this thing is team collaboration for lawyers, I would expect it to be sort of like Slack, but it's got some neat collaboration type thing that works really, really well for the lawyers. And in fact, that's exactly what they have: super secure, context-aware file sharing. So the whole thing makes a whole lot more sense. So why do we have a hard time with this? That last example, it shows an example of how we rarely position our products deliberately, meaning the founders had this original idea when they built the product that they were building email. They put it out there and they never stopped to think, maybe email is not the best context for this thing. Maybe it could be positioned in a slightly different way. Here's another example of that. So this is a company, I'm in Toronto. These folks are here in Canada. The company is founded by two guys with advanced degrees in mechatronics engineering. And so they're robot guys. They found a company building robots. And eventually they get this idea for this robot you see on this slide on the right-hand side. And what this thing does is it drives around a manufacturing plant and it delivers things from one place to the other. Now, if you're like me and you're not so into robotics, maybe that doesn't sound like a super hard problem to solve, but it turns out it is a very hard problem to solve. That thing is full of mapping and sensors, and it's a miracle of modern artificial intelligence. And it does a bunch of cool things to make sure it goes where it needs to go and it doesn't run people over and all that stuff. So they come up with this thing, and then they're going to sell it to manufacturing plants. So they get a meeting with the person at the manufacturing plant that is going to buy the robots, and they say, hi, the name of the company is ClearPath Robotics. Hi, we're ClearPath Robotics, and we're here to sell you our fancy new robots. And the minute they say that word, the person who's buying robots at the manufacturing plant goes, oh, robots. Yeah, man, we got robots. We've been buying robots for decades, by the way. And you know, we have approved robot vendors, and you're not one of them. And we know all about robots. You guys seem like you're expensive.
Okay. All right, you're back.
How are we doing? Can you hear me? Are we
Yes,
good?
I can hear you. I think we're good.
I just did a quick test. I'm hardwired in like it can't.
No, I know. I don't think it's you. I think it's, I don't know. I think there's something going on, but people are saying it's much better. Your feed to them is much better here. So I think let's
really?
give it another go.
Okay, so let's just keep going.
Let's just keep
All right,
going.
so let me back that thing up. So in this case, so these folks are in there, they're describing themselves as robots. Customers aren't understanding it. And so finally they took a step backwards and they said, you know what? Everything that's cool about us, mobility, artificial intelligence, mapping, sensors, all of that stuff is kind of outside of the definition of robot. Maybe we should stop calling ourselves robots or positioning it that way. So eventually they took a step back and they said, what's cool about us, and what, you know, so what drives around, what's full of artificial intelligence and mapping and whatever. And eventually they decided maybe what we've invented here is actually a self-driving car, or more specifically, an autonomous vehicle for industrial uses. So they repositioned the product itself, and it completely changed the way their message was received when they went to sell to customers. So they'd be like, hey, they changed the name of the product to Auto so that it sounded more like a car. We're Auto Motors. We do self-driving cars for industrial uses. Well, of course it drives around. Of course it's full of artificial intelligence. Of course it does mapping and sensors. That's what we know about self-driving cars. What I love about this example too is that positioning pushed through to the actual industrial design of the product itself. So you can see it has white headlights on the front and red taillights on the back. Those do absolutely nothing. They're literally there to drive home this positioning of what this thing actually is a vehicle. So how do we actually do positioning? This is a question that vexed me for a long time. So I didn't actually start out as a marketer. I went to engineering school, systems design engineering school. But I ended up getting a job at a startup in marketing and decided that was my jam. In that, my first product that I worked on, we did a repositioning exercise, and it struck me that nobody knew how to do it. And the thing that I kept coming across was this thing called a positioning statement. If you're to go and learn something about positioning, you might come across this. The positioning statement is a bit like a Mad Lib sort of an exercise where there's a bunch of blanks and you fill in the blanks with things like your market category and what your offering is and what your competition is and how you're different. The only problem is in that exercise, we were never taught how to actually fill in the blanks. So the first time I learned this was, after I'd been working in marketing for a few years, I thought I better take a marketing class. So I took a class at a university in the States, and they were teaching this thing. And at the end of the class, the professor said, so, you just fill in the blanks and that's it. You've got positioning. And I'm at the back going, no, that can't be how it works. Like, you have a blank in there that says market category. Like, if it were the previous example, how would I know that my robot is better positioned as a self-driving car? How would I know? And the answer the professor gave me when I asked that question is, professor said, Trust me, April, you'll just know. And that just didn't cut it for me. That hadn't worked for me so far. Like, I just finished a degree in systems design engineering. Like, I didn't just know mechanics of deformable solids. And in fact, I didn't just know anything else in marketing. I had to figure out how to do segmentation and a lot of other things. So this didn't cut it for me. I actually think if you want to do positioning, you can solve this problem much like we do any other engineering problem, or at least that's how I thought about it in my little brain. So positioning itself can be broken down into 5 component pieces. The pieces look like this. The first one is market category. So are you email or are you team collaboration? Are you a robot or are you a self-driving car? The second one is competitive alternatives. Who do you compete against? The next one is unique attributes or features. What can you do that the competitors can't do? The next one is value, which is so what for customers? What is the value that you can deliver for buyers? And the last one is customer segment. You're not trying to sell to everybody. Not everybody needs your stuff. So who is it that really, really needs your stuff? If you want to do this properly, when you break this apart into pieces, the first thing you realize is all of the pieces actually have a relationship to each other. So if I take anything on this wheel, like the value, so the value that I can deliver for customers that's unique is completely dependent on the unique attributes or unique features of my product. But the unique features of my product are only unique when I compare them to a competitive alternative. So those things are all related to each other. And then, customer segment, my best fit customers, these are the people that actually care a lot about my value. So those two things are related. And this idea of market category, my best market category, or the answer to am I email versus team collaboration, is essentially the context I weave around my product so that this value is obvious to this target customer segment. So I need those two before I can do that. If I reason it out that way, the process of doing positioning kind of goes like this. I have to start by saying, look, like if my product didn't exist, what would everyone do? And that's my competitive alternative. And sometimes that's not even a product that looks like mine. Sometimes that's like, I would just do this in a spreadsheet, or I would just use Word or something to do this. So documents and spreadsheets and manual processes are often our toughest competition. But once I understand who it is that I'm competing with, then I can say, all right, if what I'm really competing against is a spreadsheet, then what have I got that doesn't have? And then once I understand what I've got feature function wise, then I can say, well, so what for customers? What's the value I can deliver? And then once I understand that, then I can say, well, who cares a lot about that value? These are the people I should be trying to sell to, or the people that are most likely to buy from me. And then the last thing is, once I understand, here's the value I can deliver, here are the customers that care a lot about that, then I can say, well, what's the best market context to put around this? Am I email or team collaboration? The trick in this thing is the starting point. We often don't think about the right competitive alternatives, so we end up with weird positioning. So I'll give you an example. I probably get 2 or 3 calls a week from startups that tell me, we have this thing and it's really cool. And I'll say, okay, who do you compete with? And they'll give me a big long list of little companies I've never heard of. And I'll say, okay, well, how are you better than that? And they'll say things like, well, it's ease of use. Like those guys, if you use their product, it takes 59 clicks to do this thing, but ours has this beautiful user interface and it only takes 1 click to do it. So we're all really ease of use. And that's what our big differentiator is. But then when you go and ask them, like, do you actually compete against these folks in deals? Like, do you lose a deal? Or like, what are you displacing when people start using your stuff? If you didn't exist, what would they do? And often the answer is, well, they might just hire an intern to do it. And, and here's you trying to position around ease of use. But where you can never beat the intern? You never beat the intern on ease of use. The intern is really easy to use. You're like, Joey, fill out the spreadsheet, give me a coffee, come back. Like ease of use is not going to be your thing. But if you're competing against the intern, you know, your stuff does a lot of things the intern can't do. The intern makes mistakes. The intern has to rework stuff. The intern quits on you. Software does not do that. um, there's a lot of other ways you can mess this up. And you folks, you know, if you're interested in doing the deep dive on positioning, I wrote a book about it. It's $7 on Amazon. If you wanted to do the big deep dive on it, you're welcome to go and do that. I'll give you a last story and then we'll wrap this up. And this is an example where, you know, that process, we got partway through it, but we didn't get all the way. So early in my career, this is going back a while, I got hired to run marketing at a company and we were positioned in the enterprise CRM space. So Salesforce existed at the time, but they were only selling to small businesses. We were selling to like big companies, enterprise CRM. And at the time, there was a big company in Silicon Valley called Siebel, and they were the undisputed leaders in that space. So because we said we were enterprise CRM and they said they were enterprise CRM, unsurprisingly, whenever we tried to sell to customers, the first thing they would ask us is, how are you better than Siebel? And the answer to that question was, we kind of weren't. Like in every way, they were better than us. Like they had 8,000 employees. I think I was employed 22 or something when I joined. They had 2 billion revenue. We were doing a little under 2 million revenue when I joined. They had 400 customers. I think we had 4. But we had 2 things that we thought were really different. The first was we had a feature that they didn't have. And not only did they not have it, they couldn't copy it. And what that feature was it kind of modeled customer relationships in a different way. And so we always showed it when we went into demos. And so, you know, if you think about that previous slide where I'm talking about here's the competitive alternatives, here's the unique features, we totally understood who our competitor was. It was Siebel. We totally understood what made us unique. What we didn't understand was the value. So when we went in and said, people would say, how are you different than Siebel? We'd say, well, we've got this neat feature, and we'd show it to them, and it demoed really good. So we always showed it in a demo. And then the customers would say, that looks kind of cool. Like, so what would you use that for? And we would say, anything you want. And then they would look confused and not know what to use it for. And then they'd say, well, what else have you got? And then we would get to our second differentiator, which was price. We were very desperate to close a deal. And so if you wanted it cheap, we would give it to you cheap. I don't recommend this as a way to make money. It's a terrible way to make money. And needless to say, business wasn't doing so good. So how we got out of this was we hired a new sales rep. And the reason we hired him was because in the interview, he came in and he was from New York, and my CEO asked him, why should we hire you to be a sales rep at our company? And he said, you should hire me because my buddy is the head of investment banking at Goldman Sachs. And if you give me a job, I'll get you a sales meeting with him. And we said, that sounds good. And so we hired him. And then he got us the meeting. And so in the meeting, I went along just mainly because I wanted to see what that office looked like. And it is pretty nice. It's nicer than my office, that's for sure. And so we got in there and we did the demo and we showed the feature like we always did, this cool feature we had. And the head of investment banking got super excited. And he stopped and he said, wait, hang on. Like, are you saying if 2 people sit on a board together, you could model that relationship? And we're like, yeah. And he's like, wait, I got to go get my vice presidents. He runs down the hall. He comes back with 2 guys that work with him. And he says, show them that thing. Show them this special thing you've got. And so we showed them the feature again. And they got really excited and said, wow, so if 2 people used to work together, but they don't work at the same company anymore, you can model that. And we're like, yeah, we can model that. They got super excited. They were all jumping up and down, and we closed the deal right on the spot. This had never happened to us before. And so we got the idea, hey, maybe investment bankers really like our stuff. So we tried getting some meetings with some other investment banks, and we did, and the meetings went exactly the same way. We would walk in, we would show this special feature, bankers would get all excited, we'd close a deal. What we discovered is that our secret feature had great value in the sales process of an investment bank. Now, How did this change our positioning? Well, it sparked a conversation internal to the company. We went back and we were like, you know what? Maybe we're not enterprise CRM. Maybe we're CRM for investment banks. Now that doesn't sound like a big change, but it was a big change. And it was a big change for everybody in the company to get their heads around. We weren't going to try to sell to everybody anymore. We were just going to sell to investment banks. We had investors at the time. The investors hated that idea. The investors were like, are you kidding me? How many of these are you going to sell? Like, how many investment banks are there? Like, we invested in you because we want you to like take Siebel out of the market. And you're telling us now you're going to be this little niche thing that I didn't like it. And how we convinced them is we said, look, we're going to focus on investment banking right now, but we're not going to stay there forever. The idea is we're going to sell to investment banks because that's the easiest place for us to sell right now. And once we've sold to a whole bunch of investment banks, then we're going to sell to a bunch of banks that sell to consumer banks. And then once we've sold a bunch of consumer banks, then we're going to go sell to insurance, and we're going to be CRM for financial services across the board. And if we're successful doing that, then we're going to be a big company, and then we're going to go take Siebel on. But right now we can't win against them directly. So we're going to do it like that. They agreed, we shifted our positioning, and that completely changed everything for the company. The biggest thing it changed was we never got into a direct competition with Siebel again. So we would walk in and we'd say, hey, we're CRM for investment banks. And the bankers would look at us and say, no, wait a second. Don't you compete with Siebel? And we'd say, oh, Siebel. We love those guys. They're amazing. What an amazing company. 2 billion revenue, 9,000 employees, so many customers. They're like the world's most amazing general purpose CRM. For like call centers in India and manufacturing plants and other things like that, but not you, Wolf of Wall Street. What you need is something really special. And let me show you this thing. And we show them the thing, and then we cut them off. We sold so much stuff after we did that repositioning. We went from 2 million to a little under 80 million in about a year and a half, which was nuts. And then the end of this story is, the guys from Siebel got so mad at us beating them all over Wall Street and then in Europe and then everywhere else that they came and acquired us for $1.7 billion. and that's the end of that story. That's it. I'm probably out of time. This has been fun, even though it was technically challenging. If you want to ask me a question, you can do it in the chat, or you can send me an email to this email address, and that's my Twitter. You can do it on Twitter too. And thank you for your patience.
No, that was great. Thanks so much. I think the reason I really wanted to have you come on, I know, like you said in the beginning, that it was, obviously there's been a lot of technical talks and things like that, but, Laravel, which this conference is about, is successful in large part because Taylor, who created the framework, did a great job with its positioning in the open source market. And there's a lot of, packages and things for Laravel that are really well positioned, like our next speaker's package called Livewire. He's done a really great job of positioning it. And it's so important, even if there's no money involved, just even in open source, if what you're working on, you want it to be successful, you want people to understand it, and thinking about how you're going to position it is really important. So I think we have a lot of entrepreneurial types in the audience, so I think just business-wise, they'll get a lot out of this. But also, if you're in open source, I think all this is still really important in open source as well. So thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.